the fund outlined in here is for the scholarships. I think, Mark, what you were referring to was when staff go on delegations, sister cities, and when we host delegations. That is done completely separate within the governance budget.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Cam?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report, which was extremely comprehensive, which was good. However, I do have 2 questions. I was a little unclear as to the makeup of the decision-making panel in terms of these. I did see a reference in that the larger neighbourhood matching fund does have a panel which has got Te Arawa representation. Great. But for the rest of the fund and the rest of the applications, I'm unclear as to who makes the decision on those. And the second question, which drops down from that, is therefore, in addition, who also monitors the objectives of the new funds? i.e. on page 20, it's outlined the first bullet point at the bottom of point 5. The proposed policy is designed to consider grants from the perspective of community social investment to improve equitable outcomes. And the next point is to direct funds to those who need it most. Who is going to monitor to ensure that the intention of the fund actually meets those? Those are my 2 questions.
Okay, so there's several answers to that. So in relation to the partnership grants, those are actually decided by a Strategy Policy and Finance Committee meeting. So those proposals for the largest grants will come and be decided by yourselves, hopefully in June. And the community grants, that is administered by the Geyser Community Foundation, so that will continue to be a community committee, and I believe it was Councillor Rebecca, Councillor Meripeka, who was on that committee with, I'm trying to think who else was on that committee. Was it Councillor Stewart?
Councillor Stewart, yes.
Yeah, so we've had two councillors sat on that committee as well, but it also had other community members on their committee. The Neighbourhood Matching Fund, when the large grant goes up, which is, it's not many people go for that, but that has a committee that has some community representatives, Te Arawa representatives and a councillor. The small ones that come through all the time are administered by myself and staff in the strategy team, and generally we work with people on those applications to develop them up, so we give quite a lot of support to people, and there are very few that we would decline, and they're normally because they just are looking for funds but actually have no community contribution at all. So when I look at the ones that come through Neighbourhood Matching Fund, I'd say most of them would very clearly meet these criteria.
Yes, you had another point.
So just a supplemental, and thank you for that, I understand that. I'm still unclear as to how either council or the SPNF committee will know at the end of the completion of the grant process how these improve equitable outcomes. How will we know that the funding has achieved what it's meant to do?
It's a really challenging question, because if you start to introduce a lot of really big evaluations, which would be fantastic, that will cost us an awful lot of money. I think that in the way we help people to structure their applications and what they're focusing on, we get people to explain to us how they're going to do that. And I think the workshops with working with people on how to do an application, what does that mean, will be helpful in that respect. And to some extent we take on face value what people say they'll do, and then the accountability that they provide as to what they've done. So I think it will be how we get the information from the applications and have that really focused, and then look at those aspects and see are there measurable things that we can see from that.
Yeah, that's actually quite a difficult one, and I know that because I hold a position on another organisation where we distribute millions of dollars, and it is a difficult one to say what difference have you actually made. And so you can get feedback, obviously, from the grant recipient, or in fact you can actually ask the people it was directed at, or the target group, what difference has it made? And that's really where you get the really good feedback. So it's something that we could think about. And I'm not talking about the small grants. I'm talking about the grants where you know, hopefully this has made a difference and you want to be reassured that that's been the case. But thank you for that. Councillor Hunt, you have a question.
Thank you. Just following along those lines, I wondered with your workshops, Rosemary, whether it was possible to have one of your real success stories from your neighbourhood matching fund there to present. And in line with what the Chair has just said, is there an opportunity for these groups to actually almost present to each other and tell their story about what they're doing in the community? Because that then adds to the body of knowledge of who's doing what, and it stops people reinventing the wheel and starting up another group because they think there's a gap when simply they're not aware of who's doing what. And whether that's an annual event that they're all invited, I mean, I'm not wanting it to be an onerous thing, more like a collegial sharing your story event, but I think that would be really beneficial for everyone in the community, and it could be open to others, whoever wanted to attend, to hear about the things happening, particularly at the grassroots level, because it is in neighbourhoods that people think nobody loves us and there's no work done. And when a committed group of residents do get together, then they may well find others who are willing to join in, but they don't know what they don't know at this point. So I wondered if that could be something that was factored on an annual basis as a social get-together of some kind.
Yes, I think that can be given some consideration. Rosemary, the other question I'd like to put to you, or pose to you, is that there's an opportunity sometimes for community groups to be get co-funding, so that then they do end up with an amount that they know can be used and targeted well. So do you actually play some sort of a information sharing role to assist groups when they come? Because, you know, they've got DIA funding, you've got Rotorua Energy funding, you've got Geyserland, so that they know there's an opportunity to get more, perhaps to get the amount that they want, but it won't just come from one. Do we have a role in that?
Yeah, I think we certainly do. We fund the Generosity New Zealand program so that public as well as council officers can actually access that website to look for other funders. So we do actively direct people to look at that and to look at other funders in the community. And sometimes they don't quite fit our criteria, and so the officers quite frequently refer them to other funders as well.
Thank you. There's a few more questions. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Oh, not a question, just a comment. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I know through having worked with some of these groups that the accountability side of it can be administratively crippling for a relatively small grant, and so I like the approach that there is a strong focus on scrutiny of the application and alignment with the 2030 goals at the front end. And I think in terms of Councillor Hunt's comments around acknowledgement, I think it behoves us all, and particularly your scrutiny panel, Rosemary, to encourage these groups to put themselves forward for the District Community Awards, because there are some great community stories told at those awards about the work that's being done by the various not-for-profits in our community. So I think that's where we get that's a great opportunity to get the feedback. You know, without sort of setting up another framework. Those are just my thoughts, but I support the motion.
Thank you. Your Worship.
Yes, I support the motion. I think for councillors that are new this term, it's really, and board members, this is quite a finessed result of the last 3 years, and getting our funding and our grants aligned with the 2030 goals, as Councillor Donaldson said, is quite different to just random applications that don't fit where we're trying to go. And also it's good for you to know that we meet with Bay Trust, the CE, and now they've got new trustees, and we also meet with the Energy Trust and the Geyser Foundation. So it's just so that the district is moving in an aligned way too. So this has taken a lot of work about what we're all trying to achieve collaboratively. And I think that's very important. Way down to the grassroots level about the community funds that Rosemary administers. And I think questions of accountability are good, but very difficult. You only see it with the rigour of the applications and the relationship. So we know, Rosemary knows if they've delivered what they said they were going to do when they reapply.
That's true.
So you build up a precedence.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I've got a bit of a dilemma. I moved the motion, but I did speak against the disestablishment of the Sister Cities Fund, and I didn't hear any opposition around the table to that. So I'm in your hands in terms of I don't want to see it disestablished. I want to see it promoted, and because I certainly wouldn't want to see all that money going to other things. I think supporting our young people with a scholarship to go on as I said, a student swap type arrangement through the schools, but we would need to have that discussion with the principals. So in the interim, I just wondered, before we have that discussion, that number 5 come out at this stage, but I can't move an amendment because I moved the main motion.
They've established the sister cities. What are we talking about? Are we talking about $1,000 here?
Yeah.
Well, I would just leave it, honestly.
Yep.
I wouldn't make we're talking about $1,000. Application, should they come, there is, it's going into the puti, it's going into the, what do you call it, fund. So I don't think any application...
So just a clarification, community funding investment policy will include $1,000
Yes, that's
Sister Cities scholarship.
That's an annual.
Okay,
Could
I'm
I
happy with
speak to that? I know it's not an amendment, but there's only been twice in the last 4 years, and there have been individuals that have come that want to be sponsored, and they thought there was a mayoral slush fund. There isn't. There's only that fund, but they didn't take it up. So I tend to think, while we like it being, it's not to send sports trips to.
No.
You know, it's really for individuals that are having an exchange. And I don't think it's very valuable. I think that money might be better dispensed, as the motion 5 says. I don't think it's been used.
I agree.
And they tend to have asked me for, could I give a contribution from the mayoral fund? There is no mayoral fund, just to remind everybody. So I pointed out that this exists, and it hasn't been taken up. So it could be better used. When you look at the big bang we get for the bucks on these funds, they just love little bits of money. That adds to the pūtea. Okay. So I support the motion.
Okay.
Thank you. 2 final councillors, Councillor Maxwell and then Councillor Kent.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to get my head around item 5 as well, so I hope I got it right listening to everything that's been said. The question I've got is, so we do have a council fund of 32,000 that we place in the, is it the guys?
Yes.
Guys? We place that there. So the question I've got is, we receive funding from delegations that we have here in council, which is really pleasing. It's $1,000 a time when delegations come in here. So I assume that 32,000 comes from there, but I think there's even more. Well, can you tell me then, where do the funding that come from delegations that we host here, where is that placed? Is that in the big pool of council or somewhere? I don't know.
Yes, Councillor Maxwell, I'll just respond in there. The income that we receive from the delegations, that yourself and Councillor Gould host a lot of those are collected and then used for when council goes on a delegation overseas.
Wonderful.
Or we host a delegation here. So, and we only we use that fund to whatever value the income comes in as from those delegations. So it is completely separate to what is in front of you today, and is administered through the governance team, the secondary part of those international delegations.
Thank you, Iona.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the motion, including point 5, and if Councillor Stewart has concerns over point 5, I'm happy to replace him in the motion if that helps.
No, I'm happy now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Look, we've had some good discussion on that, and I don't want to prolong it. It was a good paper. Thank you, Rosemary. Just a couple of questions, Rosemary, that I'd like to put to you for consideration, and it's around our partnership agreements, and they tend to be every 3 years, the same groups, for obvious reasons. They make a great contribution to community development, but from time to time I'd like to see the opportunity for others to move into that, and I hope that they'll be looked at with that in mind. So there's that sharing of that good pūtea. And the second one is, I see where the one-off agreement for 3 years, that's the previous community housing subsidy, community house subsidy. Can that be signalled early enough to those groups whenever it's due to come off, because it was a one-off, just so that they've got plenty of time to ensure that they have continued funding for their lease arrangements or whatever it is? Thank you.
Yes, my understanding is that it was very clear that it was a temporary arrangement and that when that will end, but I'm sure there'll be more letters going out closer to the time to remind them and also to let them know they can apply for more community grants.
Thank you. I have a final question from you, is that right, Councillor Gould?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to just point out that a lot of community organisations do spend a reasonable amount of money on making their applications compliant. Is there any way we can make some of those applications simpler for the organisations to apply for? Because sometimes they've got to go through a full audit or a full balance sheet to comply with some of these requirements for different organisations.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. I know that Geyserland and also our grant applications, they've been simplified as much as possible. I'm sure there's always more that can be done. I take your point. Sometimes community groups have little time. It can be somewhat onerous, but we're trying to keep it as simple as possible for them. So thank you for asking that be always kept in mind. So we do have points 2, 3, 4. I'll put them together, and because we've had a mover and a seconder. 2, that the committee recommends to Council to approve the community funding investment policy, replacing the neighbourhood matching fund, community grants and partnership grants policies, and including a focus on equity effective from the 1st of July 2018. 3, that the committee recommends to Council to change the community grant funding allocation to a range of $1,000 to $5,000. 4, that the committee recommends to Council to disestablish the grants in lieu of rates remission policy. And 5, that the committee recommends to Council to disestablish the Rotorua Lakes Council Sister Cities Fund and reallocate the funds through the community funding investment policy. That's been moved by Councillor Stewart and seconded by Her Worship. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. Recommendation 2, may I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, carbon reporting and certification. Mover and a seconder, please. Thank you, Mr Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. I'll put that motion. All those in favour that the report be received, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Oh, hello again, Rosemary.
Again.
You're in the chair.
Still
Thank
here.
you.
Okay.
Still there.
It's a very different topic this time. So this report is around carbon reporting and certification. So our sustainable living strategy identified this as one of the action areas. And Council, in fact, has previously, a number of councils were quite involved in carbon reporting when it was funded by Ministry of the Environment, and it really slipped back after that funding stopped. But now there's certainly a resurgence around New Zealand and councils, and it's a good time, I think, for us to be looking at our carbon situation, given the changes in the world that are going on, and to get ourselves well situated. There's a bit of work that's already gone on to date. So the Regional Council recently ran a community carbon emissions assessment, and they did that for all of our areas, and we also paid a small amount more, I think about $1,000, to get them to run those figures specifically for Rotorua. So that's already given us a bit of our community baseline. What we're thinking needs to happen next is that we need to look at our organisational status. And in order to, once we have that baseline, and some of that information is readily available, we already track, we have our energy and our fuel usage and things like that. So a lot of this information is available as data, but we don't necessarily use it for this purpose. So this is how we would collate, bring it together for the purpose of having a baseline. Once we have a baseline, we can set some targets about the things that we think that we could have improvements on. Some of those will be the places where there's opportunity for cost savings, and they would be the obvious ones to prioritise. I guess it's also around thinking around our resilience. Once we have some targets and an action plan, then we are able to look at all of the things that we need to consider around climate change. And a lot of that in our town, as we know recently with extreme weather events, is the potential for more extreme weather events and the need for our resilience and our systems and our infrastructure. So there's a lot of aspects that may well be in the action plan that are not just about carbon, but also around our adaptation and resilience. We could do this all in-house, or we could get some expert help to help with it, and that's really the options here are really around that. So the phase one is really just getting the baseline and setting some targets and so on. The next phase is whether we then sign up to a global reporting mechanism, and then a further step is whether we actually go for certification. So at this stage, the proposal is that we try and do the phase one, get that right, and then join up to the Global Covenant of Mayors at no cost, and work over the next 3 years towards complying. And to comply, it's basically you have a baseline, you set some targets, you have a plan, and then you report on an annual basis against that. There's no need to pay for certification at this point in time. That's a decision which could be made later if it was of benefit to council to do that. At this stage, there's no benefit at this early stage to look for certification. Just trying to think what else. Yeah, we've had prices from a number of organisations who are very similar. The ones we've quoted here are from ACOM, who've done a lot of work for councils around New Zealand and internationally. So I might just leave it there. It's quite a complex topic. It takes me a while to get my head around it every time. But I think just keeping to the basics, it's really around how do we make a start to be well situated for the future. We can do this slowly now and be in a good place, or we might find that in a few years' time we suddenly have to try and catch up.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. And you're right, it's a good start. You know, it's prompting us to think about it, and I think it's very timely that we've got this paper here in front of us. Your Worship.
Thank goodness we've got a paper, and well done bringing it to us. It was the first question at the first meeting of this year after the adverse weather events that we've all had to deal with. What are we doing to know, are we making a difference with our commitment to the UN Compact City? My question is, with the consultant ACOM that I'm familiar with, and I believe we do have to have that baseline, I recall when Michael Nolan came over from Melbourne, he also said that they had a capability at Melbourne Institute of Technology that could come and do this work. Is it better to get the ACOM that understands the New Zealand condition, or somebody external that is linked to the UN Global City Compact? I don't know the difference.
I think my recommendation would be to go with a company that knows the New Zealand setting and New Zealand Council setting really well. I think that the Global Compact people could offer other kinds of expertise around how we do stuff internally and some of the action planning. I'm sure that they'd be able to share a lot of that, but I think some of the baseline getting that right and it's understanding our setting here.
Yeah, so I get that, and it was where I thought you might say, but it may be quite good to get a peer review of the baseline done, because I remember Michael offering it, that there was that expertise that they'd only just brought on board, and offering that to us in Rotorua. So that might be a good peer review mechanism so we know our baseline. And certainly one of the LGNZ strategic policy initiatives for the next 3 years with this government is climate change. And so you can't say, are we making a difference with our actions and our interventions on council unless we've got this baseline. So I totally support the recommendation, and I congratulate you for getting that to us, because this is one of those more obscure things that people wonder, does it make a blind bit of difference having carbon accounting? But it certainly does when we know that adverse weather events cost us up to 600,000. And are we doing the right interventions to make a difference, to build resilience? So wonderful to get it.
Yes, I think, Your Worship, it may have been obscure in the past, but I think it's front of centre mind now, particularly in the result of what we're seeing around the country, even just as little as last week, flooding, etc. Yes, quite a number of councillors. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I concur that it's really timely that we've got this paper. And as Her Worship says, local government New Zealand have acknowledged climate change is the biggest challenge facing the local government sector going forward. My question is around the terminology for the Global Covenant of Mayors, is it? And I saw a bit of it as well with the Global Cities Compact. We're a district, and I just think and I'm not sure whether these compacts or covenants take account of the fact that, yes, a lot of the signatories are cities, but I'm hoping that our inventory will be a district-wide approach and that we are referred to as a district rather than as a city. I guess in the discussion papers and the reporting going forward. Just your thoughts on that.
I tend to assume when we're talking Rotorua, we're talking the district. I think that it depends on the size of the cities internationally. There are other cities that are our size that are definitely a district, not just an urban environment.
Yeah, it's just, sorry, through you, Madam Chair, on page 56, when you look halfway down the page, to commit to the compact, a city must, and the dialogue all through that little piece there, which I guess is taken out of the covenant, is this continual reference to a city, and I think we need to sort of push back and say, okay, we're dominated by a city in the middle of our rocky, but we are in fact a district, and a lot of the effects of climate change are felt right across the district rather than just here in the city.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have to confess I'm not an expert on carbon trading or carbon emissions or any of those things. And certainly I agree with the Deputy Mayor that this paper is timely. I think that what I'm feeling is this is part of community wellbeing. And I note, I may be off on a tangent, but I note that yesterday Minister Wood announced an inquiry into electricity and energy pricing with the claim that there's been a 50% increase since 2010. I can't refute that or not, and there are implications for that on local government. Will we play an active role in advocating for our community, as nobody else seems to be advocating for our electricity users, who are, we hear a lot of it around this table, Madam Chair, of people on fixed incomes, and yet the electricity prices just seem to go up unchallenged, year in and year out. I heard at our O&M last week that the cost of our electricity is something like $600,000 more, going to be $600,000 more than what we estimated. So I just wondered whether this fits in as part of this, or fits into this carbon, climate and energy Mayor's compliance thing for 2021. I just wondered whether we were going to play an active role or just a watching brief, or is that Environment Bay Plenty's job?
Yes, you've raised a good question actually. What is the role of local government in ensuring, the heating costs for our community are kept to the minimum? Because you're right, people are saying that it's so expensive. and particularly those on fixed incomes and the elderly. They go to bed in the early hours to keep themselves
Well, they turn
warm,
their heaters off and they
that
live
sort
in
of thing.
blankets.
So, yes, it is. Yes, Your Worship.
Madam Chair, good point, but we have got the Healthy Homes target where we've looked at insulation, and also we're part of, we've got to push more for geothermal. So we're doing all the right things, we just need to pull them together, and that's where you'll see the change with your carbon footprint and your carbon accounting.
I just wondered how it interlinked, because I don't want to miss an opportunity, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. I don't want to miss an opportunity to be involved in that inquiry into that pricing, because it is just getting out of kilter. I mean, that's a huge increase over 8 years. Our rates haven't gone up, and certainly our wages haven't gone up 50% in 8 years, that's for sure. So I just hope, Rosemary, that we don't miss the opportunity to be involved based on the paper that you're putting in, which does mention climate and energy changes and energy costs and things like that. So
Thank you,
I'll leave that.
That's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Tapsell?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rosemary, and I must also acknowledge Nikki, who's prepared this report. It's an absolutely amazing report, and couldn't agree with the Mayor more. That is very timely. This paper, to me, is really exciting for the future of our families, because when I think about in 50 years' time, when I'm 70 and I have grandchildren, what sort of state of the environment are they going to be living in? So this could not be more timely, but from a practical point of view as a council, where we must be leaders in this, climate change is actually one of the biggest risks that we have for our investments. So we can no longer just continue mitigating, which mitigation has been what we do. We wait for a storm to hit, and like the Mayor said, $600,000 later. So I'm really excited to see what's to come of this and support it absolutely and wholly. The only question I did have is I know it's going to be perhaps make some rather significant impacts to our CCOs, in particular Infracore, and the way they operate, which is where we will have those good savings, but not wanting to hinder anyone's ability or to do their job. Has there been a conversation with our CCO on this paper coming up, just to give them a heads up and to see what their views on this are, understanding that they are likely to be one of the ones that are more significantly impacted by it?
Yes, good question.
So no, so I'll just answer that. So no, I haven't spoken directly to Infracore. It's quite early days until we know we're actually wanting to go down this pathway. There's certainly a significant stakeholder, I guess, and part of the community that has control over some things that are, and the ability to have an effect. So they'll certainly be one of the people in the community we need to work with.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rosemary, for your report. I know with carbon credits, we've got a lot of forestry trees around the Rotorua district, which is very, very good. My question is achieve global covenant with cost to the council. We have to be realistic by 2021 what we spend at the council, because we have got other big projects which are due at round about that same period. So I don't know whether it's better to probably just to put some sort of limit or mention about the cost funding, because I think that's most important. The climate change, yes, it is. We need to do, as a world, we need to look at the climate change because it is affecting us, and a lot of damage has been done in other parts of the world which we've got no control over, and yet New Zealand has been asked to increase its efforts in that particular field. The energy side, Rotorua is very fortunate. We've got geothermal, but there are other sources like wind turbines and different activities which other energy companies are looking at.
Could I start that? Just to comment that New Zealand has over 80% renewable energy, which is really unusual, for instance, compared to Australia. It's in quite a different situation. So there's actually no cost for us to sign up to the Global Covenant for Mayors. The costs will be in probably, the bigger costs will be in what we actually do in our action plan, and that's not costed here. Some of that is stuff which I'm pretty confident that our managers and staff are already looking at infrastructure and having to think about how they respond to severe weather events and things like that. So some of the things that will likely be in an action plan are things which A, may have cost savings in energy for us, B, maybe things we know we have to do anyway as part of renewing and maintaining our infrastructure. So I think that the costs are relatively small, and that so I know there's certainly some salesman companies have suggested that we could get our money back in savings, and that would be really nice, but I don't think that's guaranteed. But I think it is an investment in the future, and the costs quoted in here are being generous. We're trying to overestimate and say a maximum. There could well be less if we have other efficiencies in how we do things, and if we work with other partners, that may well be of help too.
Thank you, Rosemary. Mr. Berryman-Cam?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, Rosemary and Nikki, thank you for the report, which was refreshing and good to see. Quick comment and then a question at the end of it, if you may. I was fortunate enough to attend the iwi Chairs Forum at Waitangi last week, and fortunate enough to listen into the Prime Minister and the Minister for Climate Change presenting to iwi Chairs. What interested me was it was made clear to iwi Chairs that affordable housing, regional development, the environment and relief of poverty are the key drivers of our central government at this point. And in fact, Northland, the East Coast and Bay of Plenty were identified as the 3 hotspots that they want to focus in on. So I guess I share that because it appears obvious to me that from a central government perspective, there'll be a lot more focus on this. I would sense that local government that is at the forefront of climate change and climate change preparation will be well placed. Minister Shaw in particular spoke about New Zealand becoming carbon neutral by 2050 and the reduction of risk. And that brings me to some of the questions. 2 questions. The first one is, whilst I understand that this is, and it's on the next page, page 56, a step along the pathway to create an action plan. My first question is that an action plan to achieve the global covenant, or is that an action plan for Rotorua Lakes Council to respond to climate change? Because I guess there are bigger, wider things. For instance, Te Arawa has a climate change group that's run by Nikki Douglas at Te Arawa Lakes Trust. Some of the discussions there are that with climate change, if the South Island rivers dry up, which they are doing, those regions that have access to renewable energy will be well placed, which potentially for this region is good in the future. How does Rotorua Lakes Council plan to respond to that? So whilst I get this and support it fully, my first question is I'm a little unsure if it's an action plan to achieve certification or if it's an action plan for the council to respond to climate change. My second question, and I think this is touched on before with some of the concerns about cost, just to share with my day job, I had a meeting with MB, and I think I shared before, straight after the election, they were asked to quantify the impact of moving the entire government fleet to electric vehicles. Now, and I notice Auckland Transport has already changed a number of theirs to EVs. So will this work as part of the action plan inform those sorts of interventions moving forward? Because my understanding is all it is you replace when you turn over vehicles anyway, and then you make savings on the maintenance costs. So 2 questions.
Yep, okay. So the first question, the action plan is an action plan for the council and the community around what we should be doing and what we can do and how we prioritise those things. And it just so happens that you need a plan in order to tick the box for global covenant measures. It's not just here's a plan with nothing in it. Now you could give us a tick. It will be a real plan. The other issue around electric vehicles is an interesting one, and you also raised the issue if some of the renewable hydro sources dry up in the South Island, then I guess New Zealand will keep the gas turbines going, which means that electric vehicles will be running on gas, not gas-powered electricity. So it's not always straightforward exactly where you have an impact. So it's really important to get good evidence and good advice around what real impacts you make, really digging down, because some things look like electric vehicles. If all of our electricity was renewable source, then electric vehicles would be great, but it's not quite. that may change in the future. So I think it's one of those things that you really have to watch what's happening and all the other things that keep changing at the same time.
Yes.
Yes, and I agree wholeheartedly there, but just for clarification, my understanding is there's at least 2 iwi trusts within our arohi that are sitting on geothermal fields that power companies have explored but do not want to activate because they don't need the power yet. Now, because we have an excess of power. However, if the nation moves to EVs, if we move to more things like that, well, we have the benefit of being in a region that has a renewable energy source. There's very few places in the world that have that. My thinking is, how do we line these things up so that by 2030, there might be another geothermal power station locally. By 2050, there might be one more. It's that sort of thing.
I think that's probably, some of that is beyond the scope of local government. It's national stuff, and it's also privatised power companies who I'm sure look at the economics of at what point do they actually develop a resource, which is obviously many millions of dollars. But I think that you're right, we're sitting on a resource, and the potential economically for that to be a significant resource in the future is something we have to keep an eye on.
Thank you. But I think that, we do need to be aware that those are going to be the opportunities in the future, and they'll be signalled, I suspect, in the report, although at this point in time it won't be for us to be doing anything in that scale, but certainly it's something there that we have to, we are aware of anyway. Your Worship, you wanted to raise a point?
Look, I think this discussion is very timely, but it's a discussion outside of this resolution today, which is to establish a baseline, which we haven't got,
it is.
Before we get into the action plan, and to stop, as mayors of the country, just signing compacts to be carbon neutral. Do something. This is the do something start point.
Yes.
And that's great. But the other do something is really to activate that regional geothermal working party that Regional Council have established, and Councillor Bentley's our member on. I believe that's where the discussions that you've raised this morning need to be channelled through. And so it would be good if we got on and tried to get meetings scheduled for that, because that's becoming important to us.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's a few more councillors. Mrs. Trumper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. While I agree that the climate is really an issue, it's an issue for everybody. Councillor Donaldson mentioned whether we're looking at the city or the district-wide. So once we move out of the city, my concern is the impact on the rural community, and just where this is actually going to start. Yes, I know you have to have an action plan, but we are facing considerable pressures from not just local council, we've got regional and we've got central. And so I think that we really do need to, if you're going to have an action plan, the action plan must be considered, and it must be done in conjunction with industry leaders, so that we aren't setting something here that isn't deliverable or isn't cost effective or becomes cost prohibitive. So I suppose my main question is, what is going to be the impact for the rural community in this action plan?
Look, I think we can't get down into the detail at this point in time. What's being proposed this morning is a plan of action, so that we've got something at some stage that we'll be able to look at and evaluate. And I don't know whether you can even answer that question at this stage. We've got some people around the country who have been doing some work on this, obviously, so we won't be starting from scratch. But I don't think we can get into what the plan might look like before we actually even know what is going to be, who we're going to be canvassing and what it's going to look like. So I don't know if you can answer that one.
I actually wonder if it may be useful if we have a workshop at some stage later on when we're starting to do it, so that people have an opportunity to discuss what's the scope of it and what does it look like, because I think it would allay some concerns.
And it is just that we're just starting the process, really. We're just starting to think about it. Everybody around the table here has different views on climate change. I mean, there's still some people who think, why would we even bother, for goodness sake? So, you know, so perhaps a workshop at some stage, but there are various views. But I don't believe there's any dissenting voice that we do need to start somewhere, and this would be a good start. Look, I want to go through with some of the councillors that haven't spoken yet, please. Councillor Hunt.
I'd actually like to move recommendation 2, Madam Chair, if that's all right. And I think for me, some of those questions that Mrs Trumper raised, when we get to phase 1, the analyse results and set targets, that'll be the time when we work out, is it affordable, how it's going to affect us. I think for me, the big thing is, by doing the carbon footprint, it's going to raise awareness, obviously originally in the committee that's in staff, but also for us and for our community. And it really sets us up to remind the community that we are taking this seriously. This is a really important step, and that while there are global issues happening, it is about the local response and our local understanding and awareness. So my understanding of this is that I think it's a great place to start. It is going to increase the awareness internally, but it's also going to increase the awareness around the community about why we're doing it, what's it for, where will we end up, and the potential financial ramifications of doing something compared to doing nothing, which is going to be the question that we'll be debating for quite a long time. So I'm happy to move.
Thank you. Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, Mr Berryman-Camp's questions actually clarified a couple of points for me, so I would just like to reaffirm my support for Councillor Donaldson's comment about we need to be looking at the district, not the city. We need to look at the whole area, and actually just support Mrs Trumper and her comments in putting forth issues for the rural area. And it is always music to my ears to hear someone else advocating for communities outside of council, so you don't just get sick of hearing me do it. But I do want to say that I think establishing a baseline is incredibly important, but the really important bit is in using that to move forward. And what I'm really looking forward to seeing is District Council, Regional Council and Te Arawa all working proactively to come up with some strategies to deal with climate change. And I see this as the starting point of it.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While there's still controversy right around the world by people that are far more intelligent than I who disagree on the man-made climate change, or man's influence on climate change, I am not at all happy about incurring more costs onto our ratepayer, onto questionable science. Pretty much, that's it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that comment. You might be the lone voice around the table. Thank you. Yes, Jeff, our CEO.
Councillor's first comment from me from the year, so hopefully some assistance. Just want to clarify, I think, a couple of misunderstandings that may be around the table. Firstly, this policy and this initiative does not apply to the district in its entirety. So we're not doing a carbon accounting approach for the whole district and every operation in the district. What this is applying to is the sphere of operations of council. So this is a council plan. It's what we do and what we can achieve as an organisation in potentially changing the way that our organisation and its operations impacts on our environment. That's really what this plan is about. So concerns about how this may impact detrimentally into the operation of the rural sector, as an example, are really unfounded, because this is unlikely to have a negative impact to that area. Having said that, council can do an awful lot And one of the things that you will be doing in the future is deliberating on how far do you wish the targets to go. And as Rosemary has already outlined, there is a soft option here, one which in fact could actually result in some cost savings to the organisation. That's the soft end. But the question about how aggressive you wish to go is something that you will have the opportunity to debate, and you will have the opportunity to look at and say, no, we want to go far more aggressive on our carbon targets than the soft option. But that is something that is not a topic for today. That's something that you will have the option to debate and to determine out into the future. And of course, with those targets becomes up the implication of cost. But that is a topic for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst I agree we have to take stock to see where we're actually at in terms of inventory, I would like to think that the consultants producing this report also give us some sort of assessment as to whether we're actually going to achieve anything at all by trying to change it. And the reason I say that is I personally believe that the whole concept of carbon footprints and carbon emission accounting and everything else is fundamentally flawed. And it's fundamentally flawed because most of the major world's polluters are pretending that they're carbon neutral and green simply because they bought carbon credits off someone else who's planted a forest that existed anyway. The whole concept is flawed. So I would like to see, before we go much further than taking stock as to where we're actually at, whether we are actually going to achieve anything constructive to assist climate change or not before we spend a cent beyond the initial report.
Thank you. Well, I think what we've got before us is to spend money on the initial report then and at this point. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Chief Executive stole my lines, actually. But this is an inventory focused on the organisation, but it's about the organisation showing leadership. And I think that's the important thing is, if we all sit back and say New Zealand's a small speck on the globe, and what difference do we make compared to the large polluters around the world, then nothing will get done. So I think it behoves, a grassroots leadership approach, and we're in the role of leadership, community leadership. So I fully support the motion.
Thank you. And thank you for all those comments. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kumar. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was going to be how compliant are we with government targets? And then I see that the local government, it says in the background over here that the Local Government Act requires local authorities to take a sustainable development. I mean, what is sustainable development? So at what cost is it going to come to us? And what do the people understand about climate control? 20 years ago, we were worried about global warming. Today, we're worried about climate control. So I think we need a feedback from the people as well as to what they think, as to what approach a consultation. Well, don't forget, as we've just heard, that this is a document for our organisation, really, to see, to just look at this total picture. But I do say that while it's focused on the council, everything that we do impacts on our community. But this, what we're looking at, is to get a baseline report that gives us some indication of where we might be likely to go in the future in terms of carbon and everything that we've seen in this report. So I think that's, so look, thank you very much, councillors and everyone for the discussion this morning. It's been very good. It's the first time I've ever really sat down and actually given any thought to this as a group, so it may well be that a workshop at some stage in the future might be helpful. Your Worship?
I do want the closing on this. In the previous term, we signed off a sustainability plan that went out to the community and the district was involved. But it may not have been very real. This is only a very small part for us to look at our own organisation within, and then we'll come back with the steps. But could I also assure those that are concerned about the verbiage of city and district, that's a compact that we signed to. We were the first New Zealand city to sign the UN Global Compact, city. It's only the word city. So, and for us, we've argued vociferously with the United Nations that we want to be a district. But you can't change it just for Rotorua. So it's a world compact, and we're a signatory. Huge leadership stake in the ground, and this is the next little step about looking internally at the organisation. So this is great. I fully support it, and great conversation. But it's not the first. We had the sustainability plan that was 3 years in the making with our district in the last term of this government, this council.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, we do have Councillor Hunt has moved and Mayor Chadwick has seconded. So I'll read the motion that the committee supports the recommendation to Council that an organisational inventory be undertaken and that Rotorua Lakes Council works to achieve global covenant of mayors for climate and energy compliance by 2021. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you very much.
They vote.
Pardon?
Against.
Oh, you voted against? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm against too.
Here we go. Oh, well, actually, I did ask, well, mate, was I a bit quick?
Probably.
Sorry. So there was two that voted against it. Oh, do you want your names recorded against it?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Want your names recorded against it? Thank you. That surprises me. But, however, recommendation 3, now we do have the long-term plan, a report, or an update rather, that the report long-term plan 2018 to 2028, the progress update be received. Thank you. Councillor Stewart. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Gould, that the report be the update be received. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, thank you. Now, who's... you're going to sit here, are you, Una? Thank you, no problem.
Good morning, members. So I'm just going to give a real quick overview on the paper, and just to say that really what this paper was intending to do was move us from stage 1 of developing the long-term plan into the next stage, which is looking to gear up around consultation. So stage 1 was a 12-week process of workshops, which you were all involved in. And between sort of now and the end of the month, we're looking to move into stage 2, where with your endorsement, we want to start putting some messaging out within the community around what's to come. So messaging out around what is an LTP, where you can go to find information on the topics and the conversations within the long-term plan, and how the community can provide feedback. So that's the main intent between sort of now and the end of the month, and come the end of the month, February the 28th, you will look to adopt a consultation document, which will then go out for a period of 6 weeks consultation from the 5th of March. What we've also got in the report there is just a bit of a highlight on some of the areas of engagement activity that are being developed and worked up now. Within the next week or so, we will have a schedule of all of that activity, and shall be looking to you for your support in being able to run and front that activity. So I think I'll just leave that there and take any questions that you have.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is a summary of what we went over at our last workshop. Well, you gave us an indication that this was coming. Thank you very much, Una. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just one question on page 61, and then I've got a couple of comments on page 62. On page 61, it says consultation and submissions close on the 13th of April. Then it jumps straight to deliberation. So when do we hear prepared submissions? Between then or not?
Councillor, in the workshops it was decided that we would run similar events like we did for the spatial plan here, So we will be collecting all forms of feedback, whether it be written, whether it be Facebook posts, whether it be spoken, during that time.
So in that period, taking on board the answer to my question, we'll be developing the pop-up,
yes,
the pop-up stations, the community-led engagements, community conversations. Are you expecting us, as our democracy leader, Una, to provide us with a council attendance schedule and timetable so that we can, you're wanting us to participate in those particular forums, and so the community can see that we are actually actively involved in the LTP. So I just asked that. And my last question is, can you include Kāroa, because Kāroa is a separate rural community from Hamarana?
Councillor, in regard to your first one, yes, you are completely right. Everything you said there is what we are intending to do. We have a sort of a base schedule of activity within those 6 weeks, and we will be working with you and your calendars on how and when you can front those events and pop-up stations and community meetings and that, and they will be, we're looking to, on Let's Talk and through all our other channels, of having those events and who will be fronting those events published. So community members who may specifically want to just engage with you on all of the topics can know where you are when you are fronting and come along and talk to you.
It doesn't mean...
Oh, sorry, and yes, we can add in Kāroa.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that the 11 of us will be at one spot. No. So you'll schedule probably 2 of us.
Correct, yes.
Oh,
yep.
Good. Okay.
That meeting will be outnumbered by councillors.
Oh, I don't know.
I was only being facetious. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. And I must say it has been quite noticeable, the amount of change and amount of consultation that this council has brought within the last 4 years, and certainly our community is feeling very confident with some of the things we're starting to come out with. And in particular, you can look at it when there's a $50,000 budget just for this, but just diving into the budget a little bit more, I do notice from a marketing perspective there's not many intangible marketing areas, so perhaps in the collateral, if just a suggestion, if we could have some of that 15,000 put aside for online and social media marketing. It is very low cost, high visibility when compared to other marketing methods. So, and I think also just targets the other segment of our community that I always like to ensure that we do market, which is our younger generations as well. So if we could just maybe have a bit of intangible marketing in there too, please.
In regard of that, we do set budget aside for Facebook posts and for boosting and other digital online engagement. I just hadn't included it in the actual written report. So there will be a high presence there.
And sorry, also just to clarify further, also just online marketing in general, where you put ads on the internet, not just on Facebook. So yeah, I'm sure our marketing team is pretty awesome with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I take it your $50,000 cost also covers when you talk about newspaper, that like the Rotorua Post has an online publication. Would it also include adverts to that? And am I correct in saying that staff time has not been included, or staff costs have not been included in the $50,000?
You are correct. So within the $50,000, yes, advertisements online and publishable version are included. The development of a long-term plan through its development and also through the consultation phase is very hard to justify in terms of, or quantify rather, in terms of staff costs. So they are not put here in front of you.
Sorry. One of my questions was, are you going to put an advert in the online Daily Post news report every single day or not over between the 5th of March?
The detail around the advertising in that regard has not been locked down at this point in time, so I can't give full details on that, but there will be online advertisements.
Mr Berryman Cam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got 3 questions. First of all, and forgive me, Owen, if I missed that, but because it was a long-term plan update, I realise this is predominantly about the consultation phase, but I wasn't too sure if anything pertaining to the spatial plan is being included in this or not. So that's the first question.
Okay, I'll answer that now, shall I? I'm not sure I covered it off in this report, but it was covered off in the last workshop on the LTP, just to set context of where the spatial plan was at. I believe all of the feedback from all of the community events and the World Cafe have been made available on Let's Talk. Individual packages for yourselves we will be making available to you after the consultation document is adopted, and then looking to hold within, I believe, either the March or the April SPNF a decision-making report. So that report will bring back to you the summary of all that feedback, the themes that have come from that feedback, and then the staff's recommendation on where to go from spatial plan towards a final plan. We're then looking to actually finalise a spatial plan at the same time as the long-term plan, so that would be the end of June.
Excellent, thank you for that. My next question sort of combined on page 62, I think it is. I noticed one of the pop-up stations is the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre and the museum. I sort of, yeah, because they're both closed, I'm not 100% sure if you're going to get a lot of foot traffic. But I was wondering, how do we feed in potential pop-up station venues? I know at the workshop I attended, I suggested that Te Arawa Regionals is on the 2nd, actually 2nd, 3rd of March, but how do we feed in, or who do we feed into prospective places that the pop-ups could go to?
So come and have a talk with myself and with my engagement team, Jenny Rennie and Rob Griffins, and together we're working on a schedule, and then we can also look to how you would be supported yourself in going to, or others in going to, other events. So we'll be able to provide collateral and a whole range of support for attending events and special occasions and meetings and hui and that.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Una, my question was just on the table on page 61, and the consultation and submissions close on the 13th of April. I take it that despite this engagement plan, which I fully support, there is still the opportunity, if people wish, to make a submission and speak to it. And so there'll be an opportunity of a hearing if people want to come and speak to a submission?
No, so we agreed that we were going to run the more, well, it appears so far with what we've trialled in our world cafes and that people are more comfortable to engage in settings where they can openly discuss and give their verbal feedback. So we agreed in that workshop that we would not host the traditional council meeting type hearings, and we would look to provide more opportunities where people can provide in a conversational way, and we would capture their feedback in that method.
Thank you for that clarification, because not everyone was at those workshops, so I just wanted that made clear here.
So they will have an opportunity, though, to make a written submission?
You can make, yes, you can make a written submission in pretty much any form that you wish to do so.
Thank you.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless I missed it somewhere, there's one rather important item missing from the schedule, and that's when we're actually going to receive the consult document for us to actually sit down and analyse in detail.
So again, that was discussed in the workshop last week. We're going to make available the draft consultation document for members to review early next week. So just to give a heads up, the consultation document is due to go before audit within the next couple of days as well, and they have also been on site undertaking their interim audit, where they start looking and have been looking at the process that you have all undertaken in terms of the development of the long-term plan.
Yes, actually, did you want to just elaborate a little bit more on that process, that audit process? Because I found that very interesting, because they really look to see, have we, our engagement, is it sufficient, the information, everything. I found it quite in-depth that they're doing, the look that they're taking.
So the auditors don't look at our consultation or our engagement. So how we consult and go out and engage is entirely up to us. What they do look at is our process and all our underlying work that has been undertaken in terms of developing a final LTP. And that kind of comes in two stages. So part of that is, have we had robust conversation amongst yourselves in terms of developing what are the significant issues and conversations you choose to have with the community, and what are those conversations you then want major feedback on. And that then forms the basis of your consultation document. So they look in depth at the consultation document and then assess whether what is in your consultation document is supported by plans and policies. In our case this time, supported by a lengthy workshop process. They're looking at all of the workshop material, and so they can see your conversations and they can see your development and decision making throughout the whole process. At the same time, they're also looking at how a final long-term plan document will come together. So they come back in after consultation has been undertaken, and they look then to see what changes may have happened from the time you went out with your initial proposals to the development of your final LTP, and they'll look at how those decisions are then reflected in the final LTP.
Great. I think it's great. I just want to, Councillor Maxwell, I know some other councillors want to have a word. Oh, no, thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Your Worship?
Yes, I certainly support recommendation 2. The aspect of when we held the spatial plan and we had that hot date in the chamber, you've got the chamber, but are we going to do the same sort of process? Because to me that was one of the most productive workshops that we had that evening, and the public enjoyed it. It moved at a pace, but we got some very different people.
Yes.
And that's the sort of presentation that I'd love to see us run again, but it would mean that we'd need councillors prepared to sit at each station to speak to the topics. So we'd need a little muster of us, not just one or two of us that night.
Yes, for that type of sort of World Cafe style, we are looking to run a similar one again, and hopefully even run a few more actually out in the community. And I believe, looking at the Rural Board and the Lakes Board members down there, they are quite keen to look at similar options out in their communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, councillors. Una, sorry, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I just had one question with regard to the audit's involvement, Una. So what audit are looking at is looking at all the policies that have come through the committee structures, things that have come through in terms of that, to make sure that what we've derived at the workshops is reflected in the LTP. And with those 4 emphases on page 61, reviving our facilities, environmental sustainability, promoting and positioning ourselves for growth and getting the foot on progress, is that what that... So that's correct. So there are all... we get a lot of criticism in the community that our staff run everything. This is to ensure that the conversations we've had with our community are not staff, that the LTP is not staff-driven, that it's not staff who are putting it together, it's actually come through those workshops with those 4 bullet points as the main priorities, right, as I understand it.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. I've got it right. Excellent.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that discussion. Una's just around our community engagement, and I know that you'll get a schedule to us as soon as possible, because councillors, it is important that that we all take some ownership, obviously, in our plan, and that we put aside the dates that are good for us, so that we can be there, the community can see us and ask us questions, etc. It can't just fall on a few people all the time. We have to all step up, particularly for this one. It's really important. So, thank you, Una. And do we have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Mrs Trumper, that the committee recommends to Council to endorse the communications engagement approach to be used in developing the long-term plan 2018 to 2028. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we move into confidential.
Well, can I just, we only actually have, in terms of the confidential, we only have the minutes, the minutes for our, confidential minutes of our meeting in December. If there are no changes to that, I'm quite happy for those minutes to be approved in the general meeting, in our open meeting. So unless anybody has noted any changes.
Well, I just thought, Madam Chair, that there was an opportunity for an update. Or do you think that it's...
No, I think,
we're just reporting on the minutes?
Yeah, we'll just, yes.
I agree with you there.
Thank you.
I'll move the minutes be received.
Thank you very much. Well, just let me... So, thank you very much. Now, that the confidential minutes of the meeting held on the 6th and 7th of December 2017 be confirmed as a true and correct record. It's been moved by Councillor Sturt, seconded by Mayor Chadwick. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. So there was no need to go into confidential. So I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder that our... Oh, no, we don't have to. So that's our meeting. Don't you just love me? Thank you. So that concludes...
They don't love me.
Well done, Mayor.
So that concludes our meeting today. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Your Worship, and staff.
Okay.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Take too long.
No, you speak to your...
So what do we do about lunch?
It'll be available.
I don't mind, because I didn't have breakfast. You want to
You may as well come in going together, so if I'm not back in the...
if we don't need